A stormy beginning. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm building in intensity as the wind howled through the narrow streets of the small town. Daniel Harper, alone in his workshop, worked with a quiet determination, the rhythmic scrape of his tools against wood a familiar, grounding sound. His workshop smelled of pine and sawdust, the scent a reminder of the countless hours he'd spent here over the years. The soft light from a single overhead lamp illuminated his workbench, casting long shadows on the walls. His hands, calloused from years of woodworking, moved with practiced precision over the piece of wood he was shaping into a rocking chair. The smooth surface took shape slowly, the grain of the pine stretching in intricate patterns beneath his fingers. He found peace in the quiet solitude, the repetitive motion of sanding the wood and carving the edges, allowing his mind to wander. A flicker of lightning suddenly illuminated the room, its light fleeting yet intense. For that brief moment, Daniel's eyes were drawn to the small, faded photograph that sat on his workbench. It was a picture of Emily, his late wife, her radiant smile frozen in time. She had been his everything, his confidant, his partner, his love. Even after all these years, her image had the power to stir emotions that Daniel had long buried deep within him. "I miss you," he whispered softly, his voice rough with longing. His thumb brushed over the glass of the frame, leaving a faint streak of clean surface in the layer of sawdust that had accumulated. His heart clenched in his chest as memories of her flooded back. Her laughter, her warmth, the way her presence could fill an empty room with light. The ache of her absence never quite went away. It had been 5 long years since she had passed, but in many ways, Daniel still felt like she was with him. He had never quite known how to move on from the loss of Emily. She had been his anchor, his reason for everything, and now she was gone. But there was something about the way her eyes had looked at him in that photograph, something that seemed to remind him that even though she was no longer here, her love still lingered in the corners of his heart. As he ran his fingers along the edge of the chair he was working on, he could almost hear Emily's voice in his mind, encouraging him to keep going. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had been the light that guided him through the darkest days, and her absence had left an emptiness in his life that no amount of work or time could fill. Suddenly, a loud crash of thunder shook the house, rattling the windows in their frames. Daniel jumped, startled out of his reverie. His heart skipped a beat as a strange, unfamiliar sound pierced the storm's fury. It was a cry, a baby's cry, weak and desperate, cutting through the howl of the wind like a dagger. His pulse quickened as the sound reached his ears again, more frantic this time. It was so loud, so desperate. He stood up quickly, the chair falling to the ground with a loud thud. His feet moved almost instinctively, guided by some unseen force as he rushed toward the door, his mind racing with confusion and worry. The night was dark, the storm heavy, but through the sheets of rain, Daniel saw something on his doorstep. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he stepped forward, every muscle tense with anticipation. There, lying in a pile of soaked blankets, were 2 tiny bundles. At first, he thought they were just stray animals, but as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. 2 babies, no older than a few months, were crying in the storm's embrace. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, their tiny hands reaching out for someone, anyone, to help them. The blankets they were wrapped in were tattered, soaked through with rain, but they were unmistakably human. Daniel's hands shook as he knelt beside them, the urgency of the situation overwhelming him. The girls were cold, their small bodies trembling from the chill of the night air. He scooped them up in his arms, holding them close to his chest, as if he could protect them from the storm and the world beyond it. He could barely make out their faces in the dim light, but the moment his eyes met theirs, something inside him shifted. These girls needed him. He didn't know where they came from or who had left them here, but in that moment, he understood that they were his responsibility now. He looked down at the girls, his heart swelling with a strange sense of attachment and tenderness. There was no question in his mind. These children, fragile and innocent, would be his daughters. He didn't know why they had been abandoned, but he wouldn't let them face the world alone. As he carried them inside, a faint glow from a nearby streetlight illuminated a small piece of paper tied to one of the girls' blankets. With trembling hands, Daniel untied the knot and unfolded the note. The handwriting was hurried, shaky, but legible. "Please, take care of them. They are yours now." The words sent a chill down his spine. They are yours now. The note was a plea, a desperate cry for help, but it also felt like a strange form of destiny. He didn't know what it meant, but somehow, in that moment, Daniel felt as though his life had been irrevocably changed. He settled the girls onto the couch, wrapping them in fresh, warm blankets as he tried to calm their cries. The storm raged outside, the winds howling and lightning flashing, but inside the small house, Daniel felt a sense of peace. There was work to be done, a new chapter of his life that was just beginning, and he would face it with the same love and devotion he had given to Emily. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a flicker of hope, a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he had been missing. These girls, whoever they were and wherever they came from, needed him, and he would not fail them. A life built from love. As the years passed, Daniel's life began to take on a rhythm he hadn't anticipated. Raising two young girls, Lily and Rose, brought a new kind of fulfillment he hadn't expected. They were more than just children to him. They were his daughters, his responsibility, and his joy. The first few months had been a blur of sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and worrying over every little thing. Daniel wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, or if he was even capable of being the kind of father these girls deserved. But as time went on, he found that love came more naturally than he'd expected. From the very beginning, he devoted himself to creating a home for Lily and Rose. The house that had once felt too quiet, too empty, now hummed with the sounds of laughter, music, and the occasional tantrum. Daniel's workshop, once a place of solitude, now became a backdrop to the chaos of family life. The girls would often come in to watch him work, their tiny hands reaching for the scraps of wood, their innocent curiosity reminding him of the simple joys in life. Lily and Rose grew quickly, their personalities emerging as they reached each new milestone. Lily was the more quiet and thoughtful of the two, often lost in her books or daydreaming by the window. Rose, on the other hand, was fearless, adventurous, and constantly asking questions. Daniel couldn't help but marvel at how different they were, yet how alike they seemed when they stood together, their hands intertwined, a shared bond that only grew stronger with time. He remembered the first time they'd asked about their past. It had been a quiet evening, the three of them sitting together on the porch as the sun set behind the hills. They had always known they were different. There was no hiding that. Their dark eyes, the unusual way their hair curled, the way they had arrived on his doorstep in the middle of a storm, all these things had always made them wonder. "Dad," Lily had asked that evening, her voice soft but full of curiosity, "where did we come from? Why were we left on your doorstep?" The question had hit him like a bolt of lightning. For years he had avoided the topic, choosing instead to let the past stay buried where it belonged. But in that moment he realized that, no matter how much he wished to protect them from the truth, the girls had the right to know their story. "I found you on my doorstep during a storm," Daniel had said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I don't know where you came from or who left you there, but I promise you this. You are my daughters, and I love you more than anything in this world." Rose had blinked up at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "You don't know anything about us, our real parents." Daniel had shaken his head. "I don't. But what matters is that you are here now, and you're not alone. I'll always take care of you." Though Lily and Rose hadn't seemed entirely satisfied with his answer, they had accepted it, for the time being. They were young, but they had a deep understanding of love and loyalty, and in their eyes, Daniel had already become the only father they would ever need. As they grew older, Daniel's bond with them only deepened. He helped them with their schoolwork, taught them how to ride bikes, and even showed them how to carve small trinkets out of wood in his workshop. Each small moment, each shared laugh, each lesson learned, told him that this was his purpose. The girls, in turn, filled his life with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. He loved watching them grow, seeing their personalities blossom. He was there for every school recital, every soccer game, and every broken heart. The laughter and chaos they brought to the house kept him grounded, reminding him that life, no matter how challenging, was beautiful when shared with those you loved. But life wasn't without its struggles. There were days when Daniel would come home from a long day of work to find his daughters upset over something, maybe a fight with a friend or a bad grade on a test. Those days were harder for him than he cared to admit. He'd never been good with emotions, and the thought of his girls facing the harsh realities of the world often made his stomach turn. But he did the best he could, always reminding them that they were loved, and that no matter what happened, they could face anything together. Despite the love he had poured into raising them, there were moments when he felt like something was missing. There was a part of their story that had never been revealed, the unanswered questions about their past, the mystery of who had left them on his doorstep, and why. Daniel had tried not to dwell on it. After all, they were his daughters, and that was all that mattered. But sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, he couldn't help but wonder, what was the secret that tied them to a past he knew so little about? There were moments when Daniel felt that something was just out of reach, a faint echo of something he couldn't quite grasp. He would catch glimpses of it, when he saw the girls' faces in the moonlight, or when their laughter seemed to hold a note of something older, something far beyond their years. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it in his bones. There was more to their story than he understood. One day, while cleaning out the attic, Daniel stumbled across an old chest hidden beneath a pile of forgotten belongings. It was an unusual chest, weathered and worn, with intricate carvings on its surface that seemed familiar, yet distant. As his fingers brushed over the carvings, he had the strange sense that he had seen them before, somewhere, a long time ago. With a deep breath, he opened the chest. Inside, he found a collection of photographs, trinkets, and old letters. Things that seemed to belong to someone he didn't know. Among the collection was a small, tarnished necklace, its pendant in the shape of a heart. As soon as Daniel touched it, a wave of recognition hit him. He remembered it. He remembered seeing Emily wear a necklace just like this one. His mind raced, trying to place the memory. But it was elusive, slipping through his fingers like sand. His pulse quickened as he examined the necklace more closely. It was worn, the metal faded with age, but it felt important, as if it held the key to a secret that had remained buried for far too long. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Lily and Rose had come upstairs, curious about what he was doing. They stood in the doorway, watching him with wide eyes. "What's that, Dad?" Lily asked, her voice filled with wonder. Daniel held up the necklace, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "But I think it's connected to something important, something from the past." Rose stepped forward, her eyes studying the pendant. "It looks like the one Mom used to wear," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a sense of realization. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. How did they know about it? He had never told them about Emily's necklace, never mentioned it in their conversations. And yet, here they were, recognizing it without a moment's hesitation. The air between them seemed to shift. In that moment, everything felt different. The weight of the past seemed to press down on them, as if the truth about their story was about to be uncovered. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this necklace, this forgotten piece of his past, was the key to unraveling the mystery of the girls' origins. But what would it mean for the life he had built with them? Could the truth be something he was ready to face? As he looked at his daughters, their eyes full of curiosity and concern, He knew that the time had come to uncover the answers. The storm of his past was returning, and there was no turning back now. The secret in the shadows. The days following the discovery of the necklace felt like a slow unraveling of something Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to face. The pendant, small and delicate in his palm, seemed to pulse with a hidden significance that he couldn't shake. He kept it close, locked away in a drawer, but no matter where he went or what he did, the weight of the mystery hung over him like a dark cloud. Lily and Rose had noticed the change in him. They were smart girls, perceptive beyond their years, and Daniel could see the questions beginning to bubble up in their eyes. The once carefree laughter that filled the house seemed a little quieter now. The bond between them and Daniel was as strong as ever, but something had shifted. An unspoken understanding that the past they knew nothing about was slowly making its way to the surface. "Dad, you've been quiet lately," Rose said one evening as she sat on the porch swing next to him. She was the more intuitive of the two, always picking up on the emotions that lay just beneath the surface. "Is something wrong?" Daniel glanced at her, his heart tightening. It hurt to lie to them, to keep things from them. But he wasn't sure how to explain the situation. How could he explain a past that felt like it belonged to someone else? How could he tell them that their story, their origins, were still shrouded in mystery? "I'd just been thinking about some things, sweetheart," he replied, his voice soft, his gaze distant. "Things from before. It's nothing to worry about." But Rose wasn't convinced. Her sharp eyes searched his face, reading the lines of his expression, the subtle tension in his shoulders. "It's about the necklace, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question caught Daniel off guard, and for a split second, he felt his heart stop. How did she know? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze out into the darkening horizon, the orange light of the setting sun casting long shadows over the landscape. He wanted to tell her everything, wanted to be open with his daughters, to give them the truth they deserved. But the truth was tangled, messy, and far more complicated than he could have ever anticipated. "I don't know what it means yet," Daniel finally said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "But I think that necklace is connected to something I don't fully understand. Something from my past. And maybe from yours too." Rose was quiet for a long time, processing his words. Lily had come out to join them by now, her feet bare against the cool wooden deck. She sensed the change in the air, the shift in the conversation. There was a tension in the space that hadn't been there before. "What do you mean, something from our past?" Lily asked, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. "You said that you found us, but maybe the necklace was from whoever left us." Daniel nodded slowly, the thought making him uncomfortable. He had never considered that before, not in any real way. The idea that there could be a connection between the mysterious person who had left them on his doorstep and the necklace. It was a possibility, but one that felt too overwhelming to contemplate. "I don't know, Lily," he said softly. "I've been trying to piece it all together, but there are things I can't remember. Things that don't make sense." Rose swung her legs slowly, her eyes drifting to the stars overhead, as if trying to decipher a secret written in the night sky. "Do you think it has something to do with Mom?" Daniel's heart skipped at the mention of Emily. He hadn't realized how often he had kept her memory locked away, how often he had avoided talking about her with the girls. He had always tried to protect them from the pain of loss, but now he wondered if that was the right approach. They had a right to know about the woman who had meant so much to him. "I think it does," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother had a necklace just like this one. And it's not just any necklace. There's something about it that I can't explain. But the connection between that necklace and your past, it's something I need to understand." The girls were quiet for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the moment settled heavily on Daniel's chest. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth for the girls. It was about confronting the secrets of his own life, about finally facing the questions he had buried for years. That night, Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind raced with questions. What did the necklace really mean? Why had it been left with the girls? Was there someone out there, someone who had a claim on them, a connection to their past, that he had been blind to all this time? He thought back to that stormy night when he had found them, Lily and Rose, helpless and abandoned on his doorstep. Why had they been left? And why had it taken so long for the truth to come into focus? The more he thought about it, the more fragmented the pieces of the puzzle seemed. The necklace, the note that had been attached to it, the feeling that this was all somehow tied to Emily, his late wife, the love of his life. His head began to spin. There was something larger at play here, something bigger than him, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The following morning, Daniel decided to take the first step. He couldn't keep putting it off. He owed it to Lily and Rose to find the answers, to unravel the mystery of who they really were. With a sense of resolve that felt both new and terrifying, he walked into his workshop, his mind already racing with possibilities. As he worked, his hands moving mechanically over the wood, his thoughts kept circling back to the necklace. He couldn't shake the image of it in his mind. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a key to understanding everything that had happened, everything that had been kept hidden for so long. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something told him to answer. He picked up the receiver, his heart thudding in his chest. "Hello," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Harper." A woman's voice came through, low and urgent. "I'm afraid I have information about the girls you adopted." Daniel's pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat. Information. His mind reeled. Who was this woman? How did she know about Lily and Rose? "I don't know how to explain this," the woman continued, her voice trembling. "But you need to listen carefully. There are things you don't know. Things that the girls, Lily and Rose, they don't remember." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. The voice on the other end sounded familiar in an unsettling way, but he couldn't place it. He stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "What do you know about them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" There was a long pause before she responded. "I'm someone who knows the truth," the woman said. "And you need to be ready for what's coming. The past isn't what you think." The unraveling of secrets. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in his workshop, gripping the phone tightly in his hand. The woman's words echoed in his mind, her voice trembling with urgency and fear. The past isn't what you think. It was a cryptic statement, one that felt like a riddle he couldn't quite solve. Yet somehow he knew that this phone call was the key to everything. The key to understanding Lily and Rose's past, and perhaps his own. The line went quiet for a long moment, and Daniel's pulse quickened. He had to know more, had to understand who this woman was, and what she knew. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the vague hints she had dropped. "Who are you?" he asked again, trying to steady his voice. "How do you know about my daughters? What do you know about them?" There was another pause, and then the woman's voice came through, more hesitant this time. "My name is Clara," she said. I knew their mother. I was a friend of hers. And I have information about the necklace, the one you found." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Clara. He didn't recognize the name, but the mention of the necklace sent a chill through his veins. Could she really know something about the mysterious pendant? Something he didn't. "The necklace," he repeated, trying to keep the panic from creeping into his voice. "What do you know about it? And how does this all relate to the girls?" Clara's voice faltered, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might hang up. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke, her words slow and deliberate, as if weighing each one carefully. "There are things I should have told you years ago," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Things I didn't understand myself until recently. But the truth is, the girls didn't just come from nowhere. They have a past, a family. And that necklace, it's a symbol of their heritage, a heritage that's been hidden for far too long. Daniel's stomach twisted. Heritage. Hidden. The words felt like a punch to the gut. He had always known that Lily and Rose were different, that there was something about them that didn't quite match up with his own history. But the idea that they had a past, an actual family, was a revelation that left him reeling. "Clara, please, I need to understand," Daniel said, his voice tight with emotion. "What are you talking about? What family? And why have you kept this from us for so long?" The line crackled with static, and Daniel held his breath. Clara hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said. "I never wanted to hurt you, but there are things about the girl's real parents, things that go back a long time, that I don't think you're ready to hear. They were involved in something dangerous, and when they disappeared, they left the girls behind, hoping you could protect them." The words hit Daniel like a storm, each one more devastating than the last. Dangerous? What could that possibly mean? Who were the real parents of his daughters? And why had they disappeared, leaving the girls behind on his doorstep? For a moment, Daniel was lost for words. The mystery that had plagued him for years suddenly felt much bigger, much darker than he had ever imagined. He had always believed that the girls had been abandoned by some unknown, nameless figure. But this was something entirely different. "You said they left the girls behind," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "Who were they? What happened to them? And why didn't they come back for the girls?" Clara's voice dropped to a near whisper, her tone filled with regret and sorrow. "I don't know everything," she admitted, "but I know enough to tell you that they were involved in a secret organization, a group with ties to people who wanted to control things. Power, influence, the kind of things most people don't understand. Your daughters, Daniel, they were born into all of that." The world around Daniel seemed to spin, his thoughts racing to make sense of this new information. A secret organization. Power, influence. He couldn't understand how the girls, his innocent daughters, could possibly be connected to something so dangerous. "But why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why would anyone want to bring children into that kind of life? Why leave them behind if they were in danger?" "I don't know," Clara responded, her voice heavy with grief. "I wish I had the answers. But what I do know is that their real parents, your daughter's parents, were involved in something bigger than themselves, something that put them all at risk. And when they realized that the danger was too great, they made the decision to hide the girls away, to keep them safe." Daniel's mind was reeling, each new revelation pushing him further into a storm of confusion and fear. He had always believed that his life with Lily and Rose was simple, that it was just the three of them against the world. But now, everything was changing. Their past was far more complicated, more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "The necklace," Daniel said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What does it have to do with all of this?" Clara sighed, the sound filled with sorrow. "The necklace was meant to be a signal," she explained. "A way for them to find the girls if the time ever came when it was safe. It's tied to an old legacy, one that no one wants to remember, but one that the girls, they're a part of it, a part of something much bigger than you or I." Daniel could feel his hands trembling as he held the phone. The sense of dread in his chest was growing, suffocating him. The life he had built with Lily and Rose, the life he had fought so hard to protect, was built on a foundation of secrets. The truth that Clara was revealing felt like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. "I don't know if I can do this, Clara," Daniel whispered. "I don't know if I can protect them from all of this. The danger, the people who want them, the things you're telling me." Clara's voice softened, her words filled with empathy. "You've already done more than you know, Daniel. You've given them a life, a family, love. But the time is coming when the past will catch up with them. And when it does, they'll need you more than ever." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "What do I do now?" "There's one thing you need to know," Clara said. The people who are after your daughters, they won't stop. They will come for them. And when they do, you have to be ready. You have to protect them no matter what." The line went silent, and for a moment, Daniel could only hear the sound of his own breathing. The weight of the conversation, the magnitude of what Clara had revealed, was too much for him to process all at once. His daughters, Lily and Rose, were connected to something far darker than he could have ever imagined. And now, the danger was coming for them. As the silence stretched between them, Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but filled with determination. "I will protect them, no matter what." The storm before the calm. The days that followed Clara's phone call passed in a blur of anxiety and unanswered questions. Daniel's mind was a storm of confusion, unable to settle on anything for more than a few moments at a time. The reality of what Clara had said, the dark truth about Lily and Rose's origins, the people connected to them, and the dangers lurking in their past, was more than he had ever imagined. It felt as though the world he had built with them was cracking, its foundation crumbling under the weight of secrets he hadn't known were there. Lily and Rose had been unusually quiet lately, their playful spirits dimmed by the invisible storm that had taken root in their home. They still smiled, of course, but it wasn't the same. They no longer ran to him for comfort with the same unrestrained joy they once had. There was an air of wariness around them, as if they, too, could sense that something had shifted, something had changed, but they didn't know what it was, nor how to express it. Daniel couldn't shake the thought that something was going to happen. Something was closing in. His instincts told him that the time was near, that the shadows that had been following them were no longer just lingering. They were moving toward them, gathering in the distance, ready to strike. The weight of his responsibility to protect them had never felt heavier. He had always been their father, in every sense of the word. But now, the stakes felt impossibly high, and he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to face what was coming. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the farm, Daniel sat with Lily and Rose on the porch, trying to enjoy a moment of peace. They sat in the swing, the creaking of the chains blending with the rustling of the trees in the breeze. Daniel watched them closely, his gaze flickering between their faces. The girls had always been close. Twins, with a bond that went beyond the physical. But now, there was something different in the way they interacted. A subtle tension. "Dad," Rose said suddenly, her voice steady but filled with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "There's something we need to talk about." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The fact that Rose had spoken first, her usual sense of curiosity and directness clear in her voice, sent a surge of apprehension through him. Was this the moment? Were they finally asking the questions he'd been dreading? "Of course, sweetheart," he said, his voice calm, though his pulse quickened. "What's on your mind?" Lily, who had been silent until now, turned to him with wide, searching eyes. "We know something's going on, Dad," she said quietly. "We can feel it." Daniel's heart tightened in his chest, his throat suddenly dry. He had hoped to protect them from the truth for a little longer, to keep the weight of the past at bay. But it seemed they already knew that something was wrong. Their intuition was too strong, their bond with him too deep. "What do you mean, honey?" he asked, though he already had a sinking feeling in his gut. "We don't know exactly what it is," Rose continued, her voice strong despite the tremor in it. "But something's different. You've been acting weird. And we found the necklace." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The necklace, the one he had locked away in the drawer, hidden from view. How had they found it? "You did?" Daniel asked, his voice strained. He forced himself to keep his composure, even as his heart raced. "Where?" Lily looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. "We didn't mean to snoop, but we were looking for some old books in the attic, and we found a box. And the necklace was inside it." Daniel's throat tightened. He had been so careful, so certain that he had hidden it well. But the girls were clever, too clever. They had found the one thing that had kept him awake at night, the one thing that connected them to a past he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "But not like this. Not until I was sure you were ready." The girls didn't say anything for a moment, processing his words. It was Lily who spoke next, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, who are we really?" she asked, her words cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Why are we different?" Daniel's chest tightened, a lump forming in his throat. The truth had been hiding in the shadows for so long. But now, it was here. They were asking the questions, the ones he had hoped to avoid. And deep down, he knew that avoiding them anymore wasn't an option. "I don't know everything, girls," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "But what I do know is this. Your real parents, well, they were involved in something dangerous, something that put you at risk. And when they realized that they left you with me, they hoped that I could keep you safe." The girls exchanged a look, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. Rose's eyes narrowed, as if she was trying to piece together the puzzle in her mind. "Why didn't they come back for us?" she asked quietly. "If they wanted us to be safe, why didn't they?" "They couldn't," Daniel interrupted gently. "It wasn't safe for them, or for you. Your parents, they were part of something much bigger than anything we could have imagined. And when they saw how dangerous it was, they made the decision to leave, to protect you, even if it meant never seeing you again." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, the girls didn't speak. Daniel could feel the weight of their silence, the unspoken questions that filled the space between them. How could he explain what he didn't fully understand himself? How could he make them understand the depths of the danger that had always surrounded them? Finally, it was Rose who broke the silence. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice quieter now, but still strong. "What do we do now that we know the truth?" Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze falling to the porch beneath his feet. The weight of the question was immense. What did they do now? He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. They couldn't keep running from the truth. The past was coming, and it wouldn't be ignored forever. "We prepare," Daniel said, lifting his gaze to meet their eyes. "We stick together, no matter what, and we face whatever comes next, because what's ahead of us, whatever it is, we're going to face it together." Lily and Rose nodded, the determination in their eyes matching his own. For the first time in days, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. He didn't know what the future held, or who might come for them, but he knew one thing for certain: as long as they had each other, they would face it all together. The revelation. The air in the room felt thick, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, its rhythm echoing in his mind as he stared at Lily and Rose. The weight of their gaze, filled with concern, curiosity, and a bit of fear, made his stomach twist. He had always been their protector, their father in every way that mattered. But now, with the truth out in the open, he didn't feel like a protector. He felt small, vulnerable, and more uncertain than he ever had before. The revelation about their past, the mysterious necklace, and the dangerous forces surrounding them, it was a lot to process. Too much. But there was no turning back now. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Daniel could see the outline of a terrifying truth forming before him. "What are we supposed to do now, Dad?" Rose's voice was soft, but there was a strength beneath it that Daniel couldn't ignore. It was a strength that reminded him of Emily, his late wife, and the resilience she had passed on to their daughters. No matter what, they were going to face this together. But he still wasn't sure how. "I don't have all the answers," Daniel said, his voice strained. He cleared his throat, trying to push down the lump that had formed there. "But I know one thing. We stay together, and we don't let anyone take us apart. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family." Lily leaned forward, her eyes searching his face as though trying to find something. some kind of certainty that he wasn't sure he could provide. "Dad, are we in danger? What does this mean for us? For the future?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, and Daniel's mind raced. He wanted to protect them, shield them from the harsh realities that were coming. But the truth was, he couldn't promise them safety. He couldn't even promise himself that they'd make it through this unscathed. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "But what I do know is that you've always been my daughters, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if it means facing the past I've tried to forget." The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling and the rain pelting against the windows. It seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him. The past was catching up, and Daniel could no longer hide from it. The questions about the girls' real parents, the secret organization, the dangerous people who had left them behind. It was all coming to a head. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, his instincts kicking in. He rose from his chair quickly, glancing at Lily and Rose before moving cautiously toward the door. His mind raced. Was it them? The people Clara had warned him about. He hesitated for a moment, then peered through the peephole. A figure stood on the other side, silhouetted by the dim light outside. He didn't recognize the person, but something about the way they stood, calm, measured, set off alarm bells in his mind. "Who is it?" Daniel called, his voice steady but tinged with caution. The figure on the other side of the door didn't immediately respond. Instead, they stepped back slightly, and Daniel could hear a faint, almost imperceptible rustling sound. His hand instinctively moved to the handle of the door, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. Before he could open it, a voice spoke from the other side, a voice that chilled him to his core. "Daniel Harper, we need to talk." Daniel's blood ran cold. The voice was calm, but there was a coldness to it that sent a shiver down his spine. He had heard that tone before, once, years ago, when the shadows had first started gathering around him. It was the voice of someone who knew far more than they should. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice firm now. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, there was a long pause, and then, just as Daniel was about to speak again, the person finally replied. "We know about the girls. We know what you've been hiding. And we're here to collect what's ours." Daniel's heart lurched. The words struck him like a physical blow, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He could feel Lily and Rose behind him, their presence a comfort, but also a source of dread. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about them. "You're not taking them," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. The person on the other side of the door didn't flinch. "That's not up to you, Daniel. You've been playing a dangerous game, but it's over now." The finality in the voice was unmistakable. Daniel's pulse quickened. There was no more time to delay. He had to act. Now. Without thinking, he opened the door a crack, just enough to catch a glimpse of the person standing outside. The figure was cloaked in darkness, their face hidden by a hood. But Daniel could see the gleam of something in their hand, a glint of metal that made his stomach twist. "Stay inside," Daniel told the girls, his voice a sharp command. Lily and Rose hesitated, but they didn't argue. They knew, as well as he did, that this moment had come for a reason. They were no longer just facing the unknown. The people from their past, the ones who had left them behind, were here. And they weren't going to let go of their claim on the girls without a fight. "What do you want?" Daniel asked again, his voice a steady challenge. "I'm not handing them over." The figure's lips twisted into a thin smile, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. "You don't have a choice, Daniel," they said coldly. "The past is coming for them, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The storm outside seemed to reach a crescendo, the wind howling louder than ever, as if the world itself was bracing for the inevitable clash. Daniel felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just a fight for his daughter's safety anymore. This was a fight for their future. "I don't care who you are," Daniel said firmly, his hand tightening around the doorframe. "You'll have to go through me to get to them." For a long moment, there was only silence. The wind, the rain, the howling storm, it all seemed to fade into the background, as if time itself had stopped. And then, as if the figure on the other side had made a decision, they took a step back, disappearing into the night. Daniel stood there for what felt like an eternity, his heart racing, his mind spinning. What had just happened? Was this a warning? A promise of things to come? Behind him, he could feel Lily and Rose's eyes on him, their gaze a mixture of fear and trust. They were waiting for him to lead them, to show them the way forward. "We'll be ready," Daniel said finally, his voice low and resolute. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. But I'm not going to let them tear us apart." As the storm raged outside, Daniel knew that the fight for his family was just beginning.